Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Glad to be here for this one.
Today we are exploring the ultimate cosmic heavyweight match, God versus the devil. From the brilliant theological debates in John Milton's Paradise Regained to ancient fiery child sacrifices in the Valley of Hinnom, and even a winged beast soaring over New Jersey, we're unpacking how humanity defines absolute good and absolute evil.
It is quite the journey.
Right. Whether you're a devout believer, a strict atheist, or just wildly curious about human belief systems, this journey into temptation, exorcism, and monstrous folklore will make you question the psychological and physical forces that shape our moral universe.
And our mission today is really to look at this concept of the devil and the divine across literature, ancient history, and folklore. We want to understand the underlying mechanics of belief, basically.
Yeah, to figure out why we even need this stuff.
Exactly. We're going to examine why humans, across almost every culture on Earth, seem to need a Satan figure, to explain evil, suffering, and just the terrifying unknowns of the world around us.
It's a massive question. Like, how we as humans rationalize the darkest parts of existence.
Yeah.
We're going to start this deep dive by looking at a 17th century psychological masterclass in manipulation. But hey, before we jump into the deep end, if you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button.
Good call.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into John Milton's epic poem, Paradise Regained.
Yeah, so this is the much less talked about, but honestly, arguably more psychologically complex sequel to his famous Paradise Lost.
Right.
Milton wasn't just, writing a biblical summary here. He was really dissecting the anatomy of temptation.
Which is fascinating because Paradise Regained focuses entirely on Jesus spending 40 days in the wilderness being tested by the devil.
Mm-hmm.
And the setup here is just crucial. Satan has just watched Jesus get baptized. He sees the Holy Spirit descend like a dove. He hears the voice of God, and Satan suddenly realizes, uh-oh, he has a major problem on his hands.
Like a huge problem.
He thinks, wait, this guy might be the prophesied chosen one, the one destined to crush the serpent's head.
Exactly. Satan recognizes a profound threat to his dominion over Earth. Because, in Milton's lore, humanity essentially invited the devil, sin, and death into the world back in the Garden of Eden.
Right, it was a choice.
Yes, Satan's power relies entirely on human choice. He doesn't forcefully conquer, he seduces. So his strategy for dealing with Jesus is to use the exact same playbook that worked so flawlessly on Adam and Eve.
Temptation through pride.
Temptation through pride. But to understand why this specific temptation actually matters, we have to look at how Milton and really the theologians of his era viewed the nature of Jesus.
And if you're a listener trying to wrap your head around 17th century theology, just know this was a heavily debated topic. Like, was Jesus fully God? Was he fully human? Did he just inherently know everything, like having the cheat codes to the universe?
The cheat codes question is central.
Right, because if he has cheat codes, a test isn't really a test. It's a rigged game.
And Milton threads that theological needle brilliantly. He portrays Jesus as both fully divine and fully human. So, Jesus possesses the perfect wisdom and perfect mind of God, but that perfection is completely restricted by the human physical experience.
Wait, so he genuinely felt the physical breakdown of starvation after 40 days?
Oh, absolutely.
He felt the isolation?
Yes. The theological necessity of the human experience is the core of the whole story. I mean, if Jesus is omniscient and omnipotent in that exact moment...
If he can just snap his fingers.
Right. If he can simply snap his fingers and fast forward the timeline, then the choice to reject evil carries zero moral weight. God, in Milton's narrative, notes that a perfect, sinless being must experience true human struggle.
Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything.
Exactly. Otherwise, the concept of overcoming the devil, of defeating ultimate evil, is nothing more than a theatrical illusion.
I was thinking about this, and the best way I could picture it is, well, imagine a billionaire participating in one of those extreme survival reality shows in the Alaskan wilderness.
Okay, I like that.
If that billionaire is allowed to keep their black Amex card in their pocket and can just use a satellite phone to order a helicopter to drop off a 5-star meal whenever they get hungry, their struggle is completely meaningless.
It's basically an inconvenient camping trip.
Exactly. For the victory to actually mean anything, they have to leave the wallet behind and genuinely experience the freezing cold and the biological panic of starvation.
That perfectly captures the dynamic. The wallet is left behind. Jesus is totally vulnerable, which brings us right into the intellectual sparring match in the wilderness. And the thing is, Satan doesn't show up with pitchforks, horns, and fire.
Right, no red tights.
No, he shows up as a master manipulator. He first appears disguised as a harmless, impoverished old man gathering firewood.
Wow.
Yeah, he looks at a starving Jesus and casually suggests, hey, if you're really the Son of God, just turn these useless rocks into bread. Save yourself.
But Jesus immediately sees through the disguise. He refuses, pointing out that great prophets before him, like Moses and Elijah, they also suffered in the wilderness without food. He fully accepts the human burden.
He does.
But what absolutely fascinates me is what happens next. Once Satan drops the old man disguise, his entire argument shifts into this bizarre victim complex.
Oh, it is such a striking characterization. Satan tries to convince Jesus that he is actually the misunderstood good guy.
It's wild.
He really claims he's a benefactor to humanity, providing humans with dreams, signs, and oracles to guide them.
And when Jesus confronts him with the terrible things he's done, like ruining the life of the biblical figure Job or orchestrating the destruction of the notoriously corrupt King Ahab, Satan essentially deflects all the blame.
He completely dodges it.
Yeah, he argues that he was just doing what God or the humans themselves secretly wanted him to do. Honestly, listening to Satan's arguments here, he sounds so incredibly human.
Very petty.
It's not the majestic Prince of Darkness. It's like listening to a slimy politician. Or honestly, a toxic ex-partner trying to rewrite the history of a relationship so they look like the victim. Like, I only did those terrible things because you put me in a position where I had to.
That is so accurate. Milton is using the devil to represent the ultimate extreme of human ego and narcissism. Satan just cannot take accountability. And we even see this dynamic play out among the other demons.
Right, the strategy session.
Yeah. At one point, a demon named Belial, who historically represents worthlessness and base desires, suggests they tempt Jesus with women. Belial points out that lust worked to bring down King Solomon, supposedly the wisest man who ever lived.
And then Satan just rolls his eyes at Belial. He literally scoffs at him, basically saying, "You're just obsessed with lust. Remember before the legendary Genesis flood, you and your crew were so obsessed with human women that you created a mutant race of giants."
It's almost comedic.
It really is, watching these ancient forces of evil bicker about middle management strategy.
Well, it shows Satan's arrogance. He truly believes Jesus, as a divine being, will only be tempted by ultimate geopolitical power and glory.
So he goes big.
Very big. Satan offers him global empires. He offers Rome. He offers the Parthians, who at the time were this massive, unconquerable empire rivaling Rome itself. Satan promises worldly glory and a bloodless conquest of the entire known world.
Yet Jesus rejects the geopolitical power grab entirely. He tells Satan that ruling one's own spirit is infinitely greater than ruling an empire. He even cites the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates as an example of nobility and wisdom existing perfectly in absolute poverty.
And this brings us to the climax of this battle of wits, which really reveals the fatal vulnerability of ego.
Right.
Frustrated that his manipulation is completely failing, Satan resorts to physical intimidation. He transports Jesus to the highest pinnacle of the temple in Jerusalem. It's a terrifying drop.
It's a massive height.
And Satan tells Jesus to jump. He twists scripture, saying that if Jesus is truly the Son of God, a legion of angels will swoop down and catch him before he hits the ground.
Satan is desperately trying to provoke Jesus into a flashy, arrogant display of power.
He wants Jesus to prove himself.
Yes, it's Satan projecting his own fatal flaw, his pride, onto his enemy.
Exactly. And Jesus doesn't give some grand cinematic speech. He just looks at him and says, "Tempt not the Lord thy God."
Wow.
That simple, quiet phrase completely breaks Satan. He falls from the temple in total defeat. He realizes in that moment that pure humility is entirely immune to ego. There is absolutely nothing for his manipulation to grip onto.
It's a profound psychological victory in literature. But, you know, as beautifully as Milton explores the philosophical concept of an ego-driven conversational devil, we know humanity hasn't just kept Satan contained in poetry books.
Unfortunately not.
When we look at how ancient cultures manifested the idea of absolute evil into the real world, it looks very different. It moves from philosophical debates to unimaginable physical violence.
We definitely see that stark contrast when we look at a real geographical location, the Valley of Hinnom, located just outside the walls of ancient Jerusalem.
Yeah.
This wasn't a metaphor for spiritual struggle. This was an actual physical site of unholy worship.
The historical and biblical accounts detail how some Israelites, heavily influenced by the surrounding Canaanite cultures, would build massive fire pits in this valley. They literally sacrificed their own firstborn children to demonic deities like Molech.
just to ensure their crops would grow.
It's horrifying.
It is. But to understand the psychology behind this, imagine you are living in an ancient agrarian society. A drought doesn't just mean a bad economic quarter.
It means starvation.
Right. It means your entire extended family will slowly starve to death. The desperation was absolute. In that terror, they believed the gods of the soil and weather demanded the ultimate, most painful price to restore balance.
Like a transaction.
Exactly. It was a twisted economic transaction born out of pure survival panic.
They were trying to buy control over the uncontrollable. And the psychological scar that left on the culture was permanent.
Completely permanent.
The valley became so deeply synonymous with abominations, fire, and suffering that the Hebrew word for the valley of Hinnom, Gehenna, eventually became the root word for hell itself.
And I think it illustrates the universal human need to externalize evil. We see this across the globe. A singular entity that embodies and orchestrates evil is a feature of almost all major belief systems.
Like who?
Well, in Buddhism, you have Mara, the demonic king who actively attempts to derail the Buddha's enlightenment. In Islam, you have Iblis. Historically, the concept of a terrifying devil and the very real fear of eternal damnation were highly effective societal tools.
Oh, to keep people in line.
Yes, they maintain moral order. If you break the rules of the community, you aren't just committing a crime, you are aligning yourself with the ultimate enemy of creation.
And if you believe in a literal active enemy constantly trying to infiltrate humanity, that requires active combatants.
Which brings us to the modern front lines of this belief. Exorcisms.
And this isn't just something from 1970s Hollywood horror movies. Exorcisms are as old as recorded history, spanning ancient China, India, and the Near East. And they're still happening today.
Very much so.
You might remember a viral incident from 2013 where Pope Francis, right in the middle of St. Peter's Square, seemingly performed an impromptu exorcism on a man in a wheelchair who was convulsing in the crowd.
The Catholic Church still actively maintains trained exorcists. And the phenomena reported by these practitioners directly challenge our modern understanding of physics and biology.
How so?
They describe possessed individuals, sometimes young women weighing barely 110 pounds, throwing full-grown men across the room with unnatural mechanical strength.
They report levitation, too. Claims of people floating in midair, completely violating the laws of gravity. And the priests fight back using what the church calls sacramentals, holy water, crucifixes, ancient relics.
Objects of authority.
Right, objects that supposedly carry the weight and authority of the church, which the demonic entities physically cannot endure. But I have to push back here, looking at this from an atheistic, purely scientific, or medical evaluation.
Sure.
Aren't we just taking thousands of years of severe, untreated psychological trauma, conditions like schizophrenia, epilepsy, or dissociative identity disorder, and putting a spooky, theatrical, religious label on it?
It's a very valid question.
If someone is suffering from a massive psychotic break, isn't an exorcism just a deeply historical way of trying to treat a mental illness they didn't have the science to understand yet?
That is the exact tension at the center of this. And if you look at the Catholic Church's modern medical requirements for an exorcism, it would actually surprise you.
Really?
Yeah, the church doesn't just send a priest with holy water at the first sign of strange behavior. Modern exorcists are required to approach these cases with a rigorous dual perspective. Before an exorcism is even authorized, the individual must undergo extensive medical and psychiatric evaluations.
Okay, so they rule out physical stuff.
Exactly. They rule out brain tumors, epilepsy, and known psychiatric disorders.
So they are actively looking for a scientific explanation first.
Yes. They often work alongside medical professionals. Exorcists describe their work as healing on two tracks, the psychological and the spiritual. From the perspective of the exorcist, they find that supposedly demonic entities do not just possess a random healthy person out of nowhere.
They need a way in.
Right. The entities supposedly feed off deep internal wounds, massive suppressed anger, and severe psychological trauma, often stemming from abuse.
Meaning the psychological damage is the doorway.
Precisely. When the individual begins to heal psychologically, when they process that trauma with a professional, the supposed demonic entity loses its grip. The symptoms fade.
That's fascinating.
So whether you view the demon as a literal spiritual invader from hell or simply as a profound externalized metaphor for untreated mental anguish, the mechanism of healing is exactly the same. It requires confronting deep internal darkness.
That drastically changes how you view the ritual.
Yeah.
It's not just shouting Latin at a monster. It's an intense, culturally specific form of trauma therapy.
Exactly.
But we don't just internalize evil into the human mind or body. We also have a long, strange history of externalizing it, projecting the devil onto the physical landscape around us.
We see a distinct pattern of humans projecting the concept of the demonic onto untamed nature. When we encounter geographic landscapes that science or our own logic cannot easily explain, we feel a sense of dread.
And we fill it with monsters.
And we often fill that void of understanding with the devil.
A perfect example of this is Devil's Tower in Wyoming. If you haven't seen a picture of this recently, go look it up. It is structurally mind-bending.
It really is.
It's a colossal 900-foot grayish-green rock shaft composed of hexagonal columns that violently shoot straight up out of miles of perfectly flat, rolling plains.
Geologically, it's a massive anomaly. It's made of igneous, volcanic-type materials, yet there is absolutely no other volcanic activity anywhere in the surrounding area.
It makes no sense.
It defies easy, intuitive, scientific explanation for anyone standing at its base.
For Native American tribes in the region, it has long been a profoundly sacred space, a divine altar for empowerment and connection to the universe. But when modern Western culture looked at this unexplainable geographic freak of nature, what did we do? We literally named it after the devil.
Yeah.
And Hollywood took it a step further. Steven Spielberg used it as the landing site for the alien mothership in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It perfectly represents the absolute limits of our scientific understanding.
We map our awe and our dread of the unknown onto these anomalous places. But perhaps an even darker, more visceral example of projecting evil onto nature is found on the East Coast, in the Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey.
Oh man, the Pine Barrens are deeply unsettling. It's 1 million acres of dense, dark, foreboding woodland.
It's massive.
The soil's incredibly sandy, the rivers run the color of dark tea because of the cedar and iron in the water, and it's a place where you can step 30 feet off the highway and just disappear into the wilderness forever.
And it is home to one of the most famous monsters in American folklore.
The Jersey Devil.
Yes. The legend traces all the way back to 1735, long before the American Revolution. The story centers on a woman named Mother Leeds. She found out she was pregnant with her 13th child, a notoriously unlucky number.
Right.
She was exhausted, impoverished, and in a moment of sheer frustration or pain, she cursed the unborn baby, allegedly screaming, "Let the devil take this one!"
According to the lore, she gave birth on a dark, stormy night. At first, it was a normal baby boy, but within minutes, it transformed into a horrific abomination right in front of the midwives.
A nightmare.
We're talking a horse's head, glowing red eyes, leathery bat wings, a forked tail, and hooves. It supposedly attacked the people in the room, let out a blood-curdling screech, and flew up the chimney into the dark canopy of the Pine Barrens, where it has been lurking ever since.
Now, sitting here today, rationally, we recognize this as pure folklore. It's a classic cautionary tale meant to frighten children away from wandering into the dangerous woods.
Stay out of the forest.
Right. But what is truly fascinating is how deeply this myth penetrated actual reality over the centuries. Highly credible, respected people claim to encounter it.
Commodore Stephen Decatur is a prime example. He was an incredibly famous and respected naval war hero in the early 1800s. He was visiting an ironworks in the Pine Barrens to test cannonballs.
Oh.
He claimed he saw a pale, winged creature flying overhead. He fired a cannonball directly at it, claimed it blew a hole right through the creature's wing, and the beast just kept flying into the mist.
And the cultural impact of this monster reached its absolute zenith during a single week in January of 1909.
The 1909 mass panic. This completely blows my mind. For one entire week, a massive wave of sightings hit the New Jersey and Philadelphia region. People were waking up to find bizarre, unidentifiable hoof prints on their snowy roofs.
On the roof!
A trolley car full of passengers in Hayden Heights was supposedly dive-bombed by the monster in the middle of the night. The hysteria became so tangible, so real to the public, that schools were officially closed. Businesses shut down. Armed posses of men roamed the woods with shotguns, and the Philadelphia Zoo actually offered a $10,000 reward for its capture.
It was a collective societal meltdown over a mythological creature. The fear took on a life of its own, completely separate from the reality of the woods.
When you look at that 1909 panic, it is impossible not to draw an analogy to modern viral internet hysteria. Think about it. Today, someone posts an unverified, blurry video of something weird on social media, and within 6 hours, Millions of people are in a total panic sharing it, building elaborate conspiracy theories and locking their doors.
The medium change.
Exactly, the technology changed, but our human nature didn't change one bit. The Jersey Devil mechanic shows us that we have a hardwired biological desire to believe that absolute evil is lurking just outside the edges of our safe zones.
We almost want the monsters to be real.
Yeah.
Because if the monster is a physical beast out there in the dark woods, it means the evil isn't hiding inside us.
Oh, that's heavy.
But the deepest root of the Jersey Devil story might be the most telling detail of all. Long before European colonists arrived with their rigid concepts of Satan and witches, the Native American Lenape tribe lived in that exact region. And their traditional name for the Pine Barrens translates to the place of the dragon.
So the dread was already there.
Yes. Whether it's a towering, unexplainable rock in Wyoming or a dark, million-acre forest in New Jersey, human beings use the devil or the dragon as a placeholder. It is the vocabulary we instinctively use to express our profound awe and our deep primal terror of a natural world that we simply cannot control.
Thinking about the scope of the journey we've just taken today, we started with John Milton's brilliant theological showdown in a desert, where the devil is defeated not by a sword, but by a perfect display of humility and restraint.
Right.
We waded through the horrific historical realities of the Valley of Hinnom, where terrified humans literally fed their own children to the flames because they believed the natural world demanded it. We looked at the rigorous medical vetting of modern exorcisms, where the demonic is treated almost like a psychological infection.
Healing on 2 tracks.
And finally, we looked at the monsters we invent in the American wilderness, turning our fear of the dark into winged beasts. It shows just how intensely multifaceted our relationship with the concept of the devil really is.
It does, and it leaves you with something quite profound to consider, I think.
What's that?
Well, if Milton's Satan ultimately fell from the pinnacle of the temple because of his own uncontrollable ego, and if human beings have historically invented devils to explain away our own darkest, most violent impulses, like the terror-driven child sacrifices in Hinnom, or to make sense of a terrifying, untamed natural world, then perhaps we've been looking in the wrong direction all along. Maybe the ultimate battle between God and the devil isn't happening up in some ethereal heavenly realm, or out in the dark canopy of a terrifying forest. Maybe the wilderness, where this epic struggle for paradise truly takes place every single day, is entirely inside the human mind.